So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this Delta E webinar. We have just had a couple of technical issues there with the sound, so apologies, confusion on when we're muted and when we're not. But thank you very much for joining. So this is a Delta E webinar brought to you by the New Energy Business Model Service team. And today we'll be discussing the battle for the energy customer relationship. So we'll be looking at the activity of new market entrants that are coming into this space. There's lots of attention on this topic. It's very dynamic, fast-paced. We've got announcements from companies seemingly every week, every day. So yeah, there's lots to talk about. We'll probably run this for about 40 minutes or so, just to let you know how long we'll be on the line for. We'll have some time for questions at the end as well, but we will feel free to send them in throughout the webinar, and we can try and take them during that process as well. So if we get started, this slide here is showing you the three people who are on the line today. So we've got myself, Jenny. We've got Neil, who's an analyst on the Business Model Service.
Hello, everybody.
And we've also got Andy, who is calling in from London, I believe.
Yeah, hi Jenny, hi Neil. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see so many familiar names joining the webinar today.
Fantastic. All right. During the webinar, as well as the questions that you can send in, we'll also be running a poll. So you'll be able to see that in the software as we launch it, and be able to give your view on the questions that we pose to the audience. So feel free to sort of familiarize yourself with that technology on the right. Before we launch into the actual kind of topic, it's probably quite useful for those of you who haven't worked with us before to just have a very brief introduction to Delta EE. So I'm going to pass over to Andy for a couple of minutes just to give us that short recap.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. And I know many people on the line today are familiar with Delta EE, but I can see that a few people perhaps new to our business. So just very briefly to give an introduction, we're a very specialized energy research consulting company focusing on new energy. Our mission and our role with clients is, as stated at the top of this slide, our focus is around helping our clients develop the best strategies, business models, and customer propositions for the energy transition. So we have a broad range of research activities across new energy, which you can see illustrated on the slide there, from e-mobility, so looking at the intersection between EVs and electricity, through to flexibility, particularly behind the meter, and energy storage. A lot of work around heat, which we've done for 15 or so years since we started activity. A lot of work in the distributed power markets on a global basis, and also, of course, the digital energy connected home, looking at the digital engagement with customers. So we have a number of research teams that are immersed in all of these spaces, and Jenny and Neil in particular focus around the business model, which you see highlighted at the top of the graphic there. So we have a very broad and deep knowledge and expertise across new energy, and we offer that knowledge and expertise either through our subscription research services or through bespoke consulting for clients. And then just to say a little bit more about our new energy business model research in particular, which we're discussing today. These are the main aspects of this research service that we provide for our clients, and perhaps just starting at the bottom is our evidence base. So really a lot of the work, a lot of the research that Jenny and Neil and the team do is around analysing innovations and new propositions coming into the new energy market. So we have a business model database where we're tracking actively now actually over 300 innovations and startups in the field, and many of those we have detailed case studies on. So we have a case study library, I think, of 60 or 70 of those 300 plus business models that we're tracking, and really that's our key evidence base, which we then use to develop insights and evaluations around how these markets are developing, how customers are engaging with these propositions, what are the key success factors in these different business models to help our subscribers to make their own decisions about their own product development, business models and strategies. We're delighted to share more information with anyone that's on the line today that doesn't have knowledge or access to this at the moment. So feel free to visit our website or contact myself or Jenny or Neil after the webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy. So in terms of the agenda for this research area and this topic today, we've got 4 items and then a space for Q&A at the end, as we mentioned. So we'll start by looking at an introduction of the broad range of companies and new entrants that are looking to develop or looking to come onto this battlefield to create these relationships with consumers that evolve around new energy. And we'll be focusing on 4 key sectors. So technology giants, oil majors, HVAC manufacturers, and also the automotive OEMs. And we'll be looking at why are they entering into this space? How do they compare? And then ultimately, what are they actually doing? So the investments they're making, the partnerships they're creating, the different propositions they're developing and bringing to market. Obviously, there's far too much to go through all of that detail in 40 minutes. So we'll give you a flavour and an overview of this activity and then really get to some of our thoughts and views on this as the energy transition plays out. So in terms of the report, the in-depth report that Neil and I worked on and the rest of the team, and actually also the info base that we've got that kind of details all this activity in a big sort of spreadsheet or database. This just shows a brief contents page of that. Essentially, it's a more developed or detailed version of the agenda that we just saw previously. So let's now really get into that and set the scene for this first section. So let's take a step back and consider all the different types of new market entrants that are competing to create these relationships. And as I mentioned just at the start of the webinar, I mean, it really seems like every week something new is being announced. I received a notification on my phone recently. So it was from actually a challenger bank brand in the UK, Monzo, and they had added the functionality to this banking app for me to actually switch energy supplier. So really an example of a company that it's interesting to sort of understand how they're entering into energy. So we've got the situation where energy companies who have traditionally held these customer relationships and you know, they themselves are looking to sell more than just a commodity, looking for these new revenue streams, are fighting against not just other energy suppliers to maintain their market share, but this increasingly broad range of players. So we've got appliance manufacturers, be they boilers or heat pumps, electric vehicles, storage units, solar panels, so all these different assets coming into the energy space, and they are looking to create these ongoing relationships with consumers, you know, driving more value per customer than just perhaps the one-off product sale. We've got aggregators or technology companies. They're looking to manage and optimize customer energy flows, be it in the home, around a building or on a site. So they're looking to do that either on behalf of some customers or to help support them to do this better, more efficiently. We've also got other types of energy players sort of coming in and really battling or certainly giving customers choice around the energy propositions that they could be engaging with and procuring. But that's just the name, some of the kind of companies and players that we see in the energy space. There's also new market verticals that they're weighing in and challenging, competing for market share. So, for example, the technology giants like Amazon and Google, they're selling connected homes devices, setting up marketplaces for local home services, and they're really getting to know consumers. They're getting to know the energy patterns, the technology performances, and if you couple that with world-class data analytics capabilities, then there's a lot of valuable insight there that's being extracted and could it be developed into further energy products or services. We've got telcos, so such as Orange in Poland, bundling energy into their offerings. We've got oil majors, the huge budgets that they have available. So we've already seen them exercising that, especially over the last year or so, and we'll talk about that further in this webinar. But they're developing their own energy retail businesses. Or could it be someone completely different or totally unexpected? I mentioned the bank earlier. You've also got potentially DIY stores, for example, like IKEA or high street retailers. They've got trusted, well-known brands, existing strong customer relationships, and could they feasibly challenge in this space? So you can see that there's this battleground. It's very busy, it's very broad, and it's very dynamic. So that sort of sets the scene for lots of different types of companies that we could have looked at during this research. And we've chosen within all this activity to look at the 4 key types of new market entrants that I mentioned just before, just because they really stand out to us, and we think they're particularly important to look at. So this slide here just shows a brief overview of those 4 different sectors, and a range of the different types of specific companies that we looked at during this research. You can see a variety of different logos of some of the kind of major players. So for those of you who are familiar with working with us at Delta, you'll know that we base all of our research on this detailed market evidence. And we spend a lot of time understanding who is doing what, why are they doing this, who are they working with, etc. So we're really focusing on this deep understanding of what companies are doing across the energy space. And then we draw out the insight and conclusions from this deep dive knowledge base. So that's kind of what we'd like to share some of that with you today. Just before we do that, as I mentioned, we are going to launch a poll. We've heard from participants of previous webinars. We often get feedback that the audience really value doing this to get a gauge on what do people dialing in think, and then we can give more of our view and build on that. So I'll pass over to Andy to introduce it while we just set it up from the technology end here.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. So we've got about close to 70 people, I think, have joined the webinar now. So we've got quite an audience for the poll. So we thought it'd be interesting to ask the audience their view on how disruptive we think these 4 types of company will be in the new energy over the next 5 years. So as we walk through the presentation, we'll share with you some of the conclusions and findings that we derived from our own research over the last weeks and months. But we thought a good place to start would be just to see what the consensus view is from the industry. And we have, as I said, about 70 people on the line today from a wide range of different backgrounds and companies, some from incumbent energy retailers, some from manufacturers, some from software companies, technology companies, some from outside of the space, perhaps looking into the energy space. So it'd be very interesting to get the perspective. You'll see on the screen now a choice to whether you think that these 4 types of company, so the oil majors, the tech giants, the auto OEMs, or the HVAC, so the heating, boiler, ventilation companies, do you think these types of company will be highly disruptive on the energy space, or just somewhat disruptive, not very disruptive at all, or actually you're not sure, you don't know? So if you'd like to just pick one of those choices.
So we've actually had 90% of people have voted actually already, just during your description there, Andy. So that's fantastic. Maybe if we leave it open for 5 or so more seconds, but that's really good.
That's quite interesting. That's a higher response rate than you typically get on these polls, Jenny. So I think it shows people perhaps have some quite strong opinions.
Well, yes, indeed. And I'll just close the poll now, actually, and share it with everyone, and you can see the response. And then we can share that with everyone. So I'm just going to share that now, and it should be on everyone's screens. So you can see there are 2 clear winners, or kind of options that people have picked.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting answer. I think it's really interesting. There's very few people who don't know, and there's very few people who don't think actually they're going to disrupt the market at all. So you can argue the difference between highly disruptive and somewhat disruptive, but I think, what's that, 94% of people on the line today, so that's a vote from close to 70 people, think that actually these types of non-traditional companies are going to have an impact on shaping the future direction and development of the new energy space. So I think it's a very strong perspective on the industry that these companies matter.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to now hide that poll, but we will share the results of that in the slides afterwards, and we'll just go back to the presentation now and hand over to Neil to talk a bit more about how are why are these different energy companies entering into the energy space.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jenny and Andy, and for everyone for voting as well. So as Jenny says, I'm going to take you through very briefly why these companies might be looking at new energy. So at a high level, in some ways, the energy industry is and always will be an interesting market for lots of investors, lots of capital, and lots of companies. And that's really because energy is, well, both global and a fundamental need for the modern economy. So in that way, it's always going to be big business, and winning business models are always going to have the potential to be very lucrative. So really, perhaps it shouldn't come as that big a surprise that these 4 new entrants are looking at the sector as it transitions towards new energy. But beyond the fundamental and global nature of energy, there's also a series of other major opportunities and threats driving interest in new energy specifically. So Andy outlined what we mean by new energy, covers broadly behind the meter, the broad areas that we look at as a company. So there's a series of other major opportunities and threats driving interest in that space from these 4 company types. And we really see the nature of this interest as different for them. So on one hand, you have the highly strategic threats and opportunities driving the activities of oil majors, HVACs and automotive manufacturers. For example, all 3 face threats to their core earnings from new energy, and that's actually driving interest and activity in new energy. So oil major earnings are threatened by electrification and peak oil demand. HVACs are threatened by the emergence of new and more innovative service providers. And automotive manufacturers are threatened by a decline in their aftercare revenues, because fundamentally EVs don't require as much aftercare as conventional vehicles do. And then in terms of opportunities for these players in new energy, well, there's loads of them. So perhaps core to all of them, just as an example, is the emerging need for flexibility in the energy system. And all of them, we think, are positioned to some extent to try and exploit the value that's being created in the market by that need. Tech giants, on the other hand, are really purely opportunity-driven players in new energy. So they're going to be looking only at areas that can support their core businesses rather than replace them. So in that sense, they may see the market as more of a discretionary investment. Now, we think the greatest opportunity for tech giants comes from this digitalization and the swathe of new technology entering the market, both of which we think they may feel enables them to deliver far better outcomes for customers than the incumbent energy players currently do. However, it's not really entirely clear how much opportunity they're going to look to exploit in new energy, hence why we have them sort of hovering between 2 points on screen there. So what we end up with then broadly is 2 distinct groupings, as you can see on screen here, with strategic threat and opportunity driven players on the right, and then the more purely opportunistic tech giants on the left. So that's just some broad context around why they might be getting into new energy. I'm just going to pass back to Jenny now, who's going to talk you through a bit more about how they compare with one another.
Fantastic, thank you, Neil. So I think we're going to talk about 2 different angles to kind of cover this question of how do these different companies compare to each other. First, from a financial point of view, so where has the money to spend and create these different new energy business models, where is that? And then non-financial factors that affect companies and the respective entry into the space, so the different attributes and capabilities that they can leverage. So starting with the money side of things, the question really becomes, are energy suppliers going to be dwarfed by this financial firepower that some of these other types of companies have? And you can look at this in a variety of different ways, variety of different metrics, and we considered a number in the research that we did. So you could look at total revenue in a given year, or you might want to look at net income, or essentially profitability. This gives an insight into a company's ability to make discretionary investments that grow new products or businesses. And this could be in new energy. You could look at capital expenditure, you could look at R&D spend. And the reason we've got CapEx here in bold, which tells us the level of investment that companies are making each year into the assets and acquisitions that they're making to grow their business. So either doing more of the same, or are they doing something completely new? Then that's one of the key metrics that we see in sort of comparing these different sectors to each other to get a gauge on a feel for this financial kind of ability that companies may have to channel towards developing new energy propositions. So here we've got a summary graph that shows the CapEx spend in 2018 across these 4 different sectors, and then in comparison to energy suppliers. And you can see that there's a really big range in spend across the new market entrants. So both between the different sectors, the technology giants versus the HVAC manufacturers here, for example, but also within each of the sectors. So that height of the bar there. But pardon me, looking at this, you can see that things are looking pretty threatening for the HVAC manufacturers here and the energy suppliers. So the incumbents that are in the market today, these other 3 players are spending huge amounts of capital on building their future position of the companies. So we've got oil majors. You can see they've got extremely wide-ranging CapEx budgets, with Shell and Total towards the top and companies like Repsol towards the bottom. But some of those spending over 20 billion per year on developing new business. You've got for the tech giants, they are all heavily investing in growth. Here the CapEx ranged in 2018 between 11 billion for Amazon to over 25 billion, the largest of all the companies that we looked at for Alphabet. And that's in comparison to these HVAC manufacturers that really stand out as having far smaller CapEx spends, ranging from sort of $500 million up to 10. And for the automotives though, this again, it varies, but it's still significant. So they're still all investing over 2 billion a year, and VW here stands out as the biggest spender of the companies that we looked at in that type. But when you compare all this to the energy suppliers and their annual CapEx spend, of course there's that range that we mentioned, but it really does show a picture that these energy incumbents, the two types of companies here who are currently active in the market, they do look somewhat dwarfed in terms of capital spend by these other new market entrants, and when it comes to building these future positions and the types of products and services that are going to be offered and brought to market. Now, clearly, not all of this spend is on new energy, and we'll go into that, and Neil will discuss some more on that just in 5 or so minutes. Much of the oil
Just to interrupt there, Jenny, I think that's a really important point. I know I've got 1 or 2 questions on that right now, that this chart shows total CapEx for the corporations, and it doesn't show the CapEx in new energy. As we go through the next slides, we'll share with you our assessment of how much of this overall CapEx spend is being allocated to the new energy sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a really interesting exercise for us to go through, because looking at this space, you've got to define what actually accounts for new energy. And so we have some clear guidelines and kind of considerations on what does that actually entail. But yeah, when we went through and kind of did this research, and Neil will share with us the results of that, it was a very interesting and detailed process that we really needed to go through to kind of come up with some of those robust numbers. Before we dive into that, the second area to look at though that's really important in terms of comparing these different types of sectors and understanding their potential their disruptive potential is some of the strengths or the kind of capabilities, attributes that they hold, and that will certainly influence both their entry and their activity across new energy, and and essentially how successful they may be. So here we can see some of the thinking that we did on this question. We looked at lots of different factors and ranked and rated each of these different company types against the different capabilities and attributes that you can see some of those that we considered on the left here. So for example, taking brand recognition first, it's very important if you're wanting to create and more importantly own these customer facing relationships. And that's a natural strength of 3 of these 4 different sectors. So oil majors, tech giants, and the automotive brands, they're all very well-known brands that are customer facing, but it's not necessarily an area that HVAC manufacturers, for example, would, they'd certainly struggle here. But that doesn't necessarily mean, though, that you've got the right to play in new energy, which is the second row here. And so you really need to consider the type of brand that you have. Can it be extended to offer these new energy business models? It might be a prominent brand, it might be recognized, but does it have this right to play in terms of the customer's eyes? And there are some really interesting examples here, actually. We've got Shell, for example, on the oil majors. They've decided to rebrand the First Utility acquisition to Shell Energy. So clearly they feel that they do have that right to play, and it makes sense in customers' eyes. Versus, for example, VW's approach with their new Ellie brand. They've decided to launch their energy retail proposition under that new branding. In terms of what we see, we definitely, from the research that we've done and the customer research that we've repeatedly done, it's shown that HVAC manufacturers potentially have the edge here because they're seen as that trusted, experienced player who really can kind of capture or develop into, certainly from the customer's point of view, some of these added energy services that we talk about. Another point, though, actually, that I just wanted to mention here was that these customer dynamics are really changing quite fast, and certainly some of the research that we've done and industry different stakeholders that we've spoken to, it highlights that companies like Amazon, some of these companies who are wanting to be that one-stop shop and expanding are really expanding and blurring some of these boundaries, and they're widening from a customer's point of view the expectations that they have and around going not necessarily for one company for one service or one product, and really potentially creating an opportunity for others to follow suit and others to diversify. So that's quite an interesting dynamic just to kind of consider when thinking about this right to play in new energy.
Jenny, if I could just interrupt and pick up, there's a question on HVAC manufacturers or low carbon device vendors. Why should they be be threatened by new energy services? HVAC heat pumps look a good fit with energy as a service. And I think it's a very good point. And I think HVAC manufacturers in many senses are natural partners with energy service providers in the new energy space. But they may also be a threat to energy service providers if the manufacturers decide to develop their own service-based businesses and start to engage with end customers directly, which is a choice they have to make. We know many of those companies are currently evaluating their future business models, and it may be that they start to become much more service-based organizations in future. So they could well be partners, but they could be competitors, and that's why essentially we've included them in this matrix.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very important point.
Yeah, but Jenny, let's move forward fairly quickly because I'm conscious of time. That perhaps we've only got another 10 or 12 minutes of the call. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so some of these other factors that we considered, I'll not dwell on the reasoning behind some of this, but clearly a presence in the home is important, and technology giants tend to have the edge here. They're helping people run their lives better, essentially, and an energy, as Neil mentioned, is a fundamental part of that. And of course, we've got some of these capabilities, sort of like behind the scenes. Knowledge of the energy market is crucial, and oil majors would have a unique advantage here. Yes, it's currently focused upstream, but they've got unparalleled trading experience, which is certainly going to be vital in some of the flexibility and decentralized new energy themes that are coming through. And last on the slide here was the installers and technicians, so essentially boots on the ground, you know, making a lot of these business models happen, as Andy mentioned. A lot of these are based around services going forward, so you really need skilled people to be able to complete installations, carry out maintenance, and so on. So ultimately, if you look at this, there are lots of things to consider, and actually there isn't one sector that stands out as having it all, which is really important. They all have something to bring to the party. They all have different strengths that they're going to leverage, and we certainly see this going forward in the future as continuing to be a very dynamic space, and really having to look very broadly at these different types of companies that are coming in and challenging and creating these different propositions that are being brought to customers. So now let's look at where across this expanse of new energy these companies are active, and I'll pass back to Neil.
Brilliant, thanks. Excuse me, thanks very much, Jenny. So the final section looks at what these new entrants are actually doing in new energy. And this is based on our info base of new market entrant activity, which details for some of the key players within each company type, their acquisitions, their investments, their internal activities as well. So really it's the evidence base that we've used for what we're about to go on and tell you a little bit about. So this table on screen demonstrates some of the key areas of focus in terms of new energy investment for each company type. Now the full picture is rather more complicated than this, but the priority areas of focus, as you can see, for the companies are broadly different across the board. So you've got the oil majors who are investing most heavily into time of use and flexibility-based business models. So examples of that include multi-million-pound investments into virtual power plants, storage, EVs and smart home energy companies from the likes of Shell and Total. Now this, as Jenny mentioned earlier, is really a logical area of focus for them, as it provides opportunities to make use of potential synergies between their huge upstream trading businesses and now these new, much more granular, decentralized energy markets. In the tech giant space, well, they're pretty intent on dominating the smart home market, and that falls within our lifestyle products business model category. So this is about extending customer relationships within people's homes, and that's hugely important to the corporate strategies of the likes of Amazon and Google and Apple to some extent as well. And that has led to some interest from them in the energy applications of the smart home. So Amazon, for example, have a partnership with Arcadia Power in the USA, and that is to install a range of smart home technology designed to reduce energy bills, all for a monthly fee. HVAC investment, as you can see there, is more spread out across a few different areas. So some are interested in delivering grid flexibility through connected electric heating loads. Others, like Bosch, are going toe-to-toe really with the tech giants through by looking to build a full smart home and Internet of Things experience within the lifestyle products category. And then others still, so the likes of Viessmann and Valent, have either invested in or acquired, or developed their own digital marketplaces to find heating installers and home services as well. And then finally, automotive manufacturers have shown an interest in delivering mobility as a service solutions for electric vehicles. So that can involve a mix of things like car sharing, fleet management, energy supply, and smart charging services as well. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that whilst each company we think has a key focus, or each company type has a key focus, most of them are still active in some capacity against pretty much all of the areas that you can see on screen there. And if you're interested in more information about what those mean, then please do feel free to reach out to us. Okay, so it's all well and good showing where these company types are investing, but how important is new energy to them really, and how much are they actually investing? So here you can see our indicative view of the annual CapEx investment in new energy for all of the different key company types. So if for starters we focus on the energy suppliers on the right hand side there, you can see that there is a fairly big range between the global energy giants like Enel and then the more European-based companies like Fortum. But if we take energy suppliers as a group and compare them to the spending of the 4 new entrants, then actually they sort of look to be holding their own right now in this space. Now, clearly, there are some huge players in the oil majors groups like Shell and Total with vast balance sheets, and through their ambitious acquisition strategies, they've been far outspending anyone else really in this space over the past few years. But actually, the majority of players in that oil major category are towards the lower end and remain more focused upstream, for example, Equinor, BP. Now, regarding the 3 other company types in the middle of the graph, well, suppliers are generally spending just as big, if not bigger, in new energy. So perhaps they don't have as much to worry about as some might think. Perhaps these other company types won't be highly disruptive. Now, there's a couple of important caveats to mention here. The first is to think back to the previous slide about where these companies are directing their investment. So the 3 middle groups, really, the tech giants, the HVACs, and the automotives, do focus most of their investment into 1 or 2 specific areas in new energy, whereas the suppliers, on the other hand, being the incumbents, fighting on all fronts, so their investments are actually spread quite thinly, potentially, across new energy. And then a second important caveat is to think back to the graph that Jenny showed earlier with total CapEx spend by each company type. Now, that original graph painted a much more worrying picture for energy suppliers. And when you think about it in relation to what's on screen here, it would suggest that pretty much all of these new entrants, with the exception perhaps of the HVACs, have plenty of headroom to up their investments in this space if they really wanted to. So whilst things might look okay for suppliers right now, that picture could change quite dramatically, and they certainly don't want to go resting on their laurels. So to wrap up, ultimately, thinking back to that question we posed you at the start of the webinar, which is how disruptive do we think these 4 new entrants will be in the next 5 years, I thought I'd share a little bit of what our view on that is. So with the oil majors, well, they look to be in prime position, we think, to really disrupt new energy if they want to. Shell and Total, they've got clear strategies in place to do this, as well as clear opportunities and threats driving them to actually do so. But we are less sure about their rivals and whether they'll be so ambitious in that space from the oil major category. With the HVACs, well, we think they're unlikely to be key disruptors, and as Andy's already mentioned, we think they could play more of a partnership role for incumbent energy suppliers or new entrants to help them deliver heat and home energy management services to customers. However, their existing installer relationships are worth keeping in mind as a potential competitive advantage for them. With the automotives, we think they're really looking to keep their options open, but we don't see them viewing new energy as their prime focus. Ultimately, automotives really want to sell as many cars as they can.
Hey everyone, can the audience hear me? This is Andy. Okay, I think everyone can hear me. I'm not sure what's happened there, guys. I think the internet connection in Edinburgh must have been interrupted. So hopefully everyone can still hear me, but I can't control the slides, I don't think, from here. But I just wanted to pick up, and we're in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the webinar, and I've had a few interesting questions and exchanges with the audience as we've gone through the slides. And in particular, a couple of things. A couple of people have commented about the possibilities of bundling different services. So the idea of these company groups either offering extensive bundles themselves, or perhaps collaborating and partnering with other companies from a different group. And I think particularly around energy suppliers. There's been a couple of comments around energy suppliers teaming up with the tech giants. And yeah, absolutely, there's possibilities of that type of initiative happening. Over the last few years, we've done a number of projects at Delta, working with energy companies and telcos, actually, because there's obvious opportunity, we think, for partnerships between those types of company. But the reality is those partnerships are very difficult to get into place. The alignment, getting alignment, securing alignment between two large corporates it proves very challenging, as I'm sure many people on the call will have experienced. And while in principle those types of initiatives appear quite attractive, implementation of those is actually quite challenging and takes a lot of time and effort to get into place. So it is possible for those types of things to be developed in the future, but I think they will be the exception rather than the rule. A couple of other points have come to me just briefly before we close. One was the poll earlier on showed that over 90% of people on the call today thought that these companies would be disruptive, highly disruptive, or somewhat disruptive, and I'm thinking that's very much in line with Delta EE's view. But I think the insight that we hope we can provide you today from the slides that we shared with you is, okay, so they are going to be a disruptive effect on the market, but which ones are going to be more disruptive? And the slide that is on the screen at the moment, I think provides our view on who do we think is going to have a bigger impact. And the all majors clearly are in a prime position to really disrupt the market if they want to. The HVAC manufacturers and automotive manufacturers absolutely have a role to play and can be disruptive, but be perhaps in their own particular parts of the market. Whereas the tech giants really are a bit of a wild card. I mean, they could play in many different ways with regard to energy, and it's really quite unpredictable how they might pursue ambitions in the energy space. So in terms of companies to watch, perhaps, we would just suggest Shell as being one company in the all major space to watch. The VW and the auto OEMs is perhaps showing the most obvious ambitions around energy at the moment, with heating manufacturers. Eastman perhaps is one to watch in terms of its ambitions around innovation, development of service-based businesses. So those are the companies that we would recommend to focus on. So I've got quite a few more questions here. We're probably running out of time now to respond to those, but any questions that we haven't responded to yet, we'll follow up in the next day or so and come back to you directly. Hopefully you've been able to enjoy the webinar. Apologies for the connection here at the end. If you'd like to talk to us about our business model research, we'd be delighted to have a conversation with you. Delighted to hear your questions, and if you have suggestions on the future research we should do, we'd be very interested to receive those, because most of our research is really led by our subscribers and our clients. So I think we'll end the webinar there. Thank you everyone for your time today. Hope you found that interesting. Look forward to having the opportunity of speaking with you again soon. Thank you.